Hi, I'm Professor Piers Forster. I'm Professor of Climate Change at the University of Leeds, and I'm an author of the Intergovernmental Panel Report on Climate Change, and I also sit on the UK Government's Climate Change Committee. Well, in fact, I'm a climate scientist, and we have quite a strict definition of what climate change is, which is a 30-year average of our weather. So if you take the day-to-day weather that somewhere has and you average it, you get to what we define as the climate. But it's quite a lot more than that, in fact. If you think about the crops and the plants and the vegetation we have, that all depends on the weather, and the seasons can change, and the land and the ice and the birds and the animals do all depend on that as well. So you can put all that into it as well if you want to. And yes, it does change naturally over a very long time. We can see big ice ages in the past where climate has been very different, but if you take the last 10,000 years of the Earth's history, in fact, that the whole kind of climate of the Earth has been very constant over all that time. But for the last 150 years, we've seen big changes in that kind of weather we're experiencing, and that is accelerating. So if you look at the last 2 or 3 decades, we're seeing this accelerating effect of the Earth's kind of climate. And I guess it is generally described by the Earth's average surface temperature, and that has gone up, but there's a whole lot of other things we talk about as well, like the climate extremes and things as well. So the Earth's average temperature has gone up by about 1.2 degrees, but that isn't what we experience. That's only a slow change, and what we experience are these extremes. So we are now, communities around the world and in this country, are witnessing heat waves and things, but that's not so apparent in this country. In this country, the most obvious thing is the flooding we're experiencing. So that has increased by 30 or 40% in terms of the rainfall intensity that we might experience in any one 5-year event of some kind. That might come with that extra intensity, and then that means the rivers can burst their banks and things more often, and all the downstream events of those effects on our communities. But in fact, we get off a lot more lightly than the rest of the world does. In Canada, they've had a temperature of over 50 or just approaching kind of 50 degrees Celsius, for example, and that has never occurred before. So, and that's happening all around the world. And probably one more thing where it's interesting, and even in this country, we're seeing a change in our seasons. So that really affects when plants and things are open. Like I have kind of buds on my camellia, for example, at this time year, which is really peculiar. So the whole seasons have changed, even in this country, by about 15 days or so. We're seeing that change. Well, it is a big challenge, because our science tells us that as the Earth's temperature goes up, which is doing currently at an unprecedented rate, these extremes will get worse. And the science tells us that the temperatures will go up until we get our emissions, not just cut a bit down to zero. This means you have to go all the way to zero to prevent these extremes getting worse. So that tells us the extreme will continue to get worse until we get there. So that gives a huge urgency, in fact, to get our emissions from where they are today down to zero for all our activities, and all our activities in every single country. So that is really the kind of challenge we've got as a worldwide community. So the first thing we need is a joined up approach from our world leaders to get to that position for every country. And a lot of countries in the world now have really set these ambitious climate targets, which is fantastic to get to there. But they do now have to put the actions in place over the next 10-year time frame to do that. And the actual cuts won't be done by the politicians. The cuts will be done by our kind of businesses in our communities, making these day-to-day changes in all our activities. So it has to be comprehensive for everyone, and the government have to put the right incentives and regulation in for the right financial investments to be made by our companies, and to give the right signals to our communities to change. Well, yes, but because it does depend on everyone, that does mean that everyone has a part to play in getting to this net zero world. The first thing is to start to act immediately, because the urgency and the temperatures will go up until we get to this net zero target. The thing is to begin the journey to net zero immediately. So we can all make changes today, and it has to be, there's not just one thing, we have to do everything. So the first is to not use as much energy and to use energy more efficiently. So we can put LED lights into our buildings, we can choose not to drive our cars and not to get on aeroplanes so often, and make the choices, and they can be done instantly. The other is to really bring our community with us and just talk about it, and to talk about why you're making these choices, kind of why you're choosing to walk to town and not drive to town. And then we have to do big decisions like put in air source heat pumps into our buildings and things, and to talk about the experiences of putting in this, or trying to choose an electric car. And I think the more we formalise these decisions and make them work for everyone, the more effective it will be. And I think a lot of people like the opportunities. So what are the opportunities for new exciting jobs, to make our environment of better air quality, planting woodland and trees for nature and biodiversity. And if we insulate our buildings, they won't be so expensive to run our buildings, and they can operate more effectively and things like this. So I think just getting that conversation going, but we can also think about where we invest for our kind of pensions and things, and what we do with all of that as well. So I think that we can just think about every aspect to try and make the right choice. Yes, the answer is, I think the church and kind of faith-based communities have a huge role to play in this transformation we're expecting the world to undergo. This transformation will affect every part of our lives, In this country, we now have these legislated targets, so the change will come, and I think the church will have to decide if they're going to be at the forefront of that or that change and try and lead the way, or just kind of follow on behind. So I think it will be good to be right at the forefront and to set a good example in the community about what it can do. But I think it's about changing our culture and transforming the way we work, and that's not going to be only solved by the technical solution. That's going to be solved by more societal transformation, and I think the church got a big role to play on taking the population on that transformational journey. I think the church and faith-based communities have a huge job in setting society off on this right transformation to the net zero pathway, because we're talking about a huge cultural change for our society, and particularly there's an intergenerational anxiety there, with the anxious younger generation do feel like the older population aren't really appreciating the changes, and they're trying to push the more conservative older generation to adapt and to change. And I think to try and break down that intergenerational anxiety and the divide would be a fantastic opportunity for the church. Church has, like a lot of the infrastructure in the country, has quite an old estate of old buildings which are hard to decarbonise. So I think to try and take the first steps on that path to insulating and decarbonising these buildings, putting in air source heat pumps and things, and think about that journey and then communicating that with the parishioners. We do know that climate change in these extremes will get worse, so our church has a role in protecting its own communities. So I think the church can become a safe haven and a place of refuge in times when we experience these extremes, and I think then that would help reduce overall anxiety. So I think that would be great. Yeah.